calls for change to women's safety have been top of the agenda, not just here in the UK, but right across the globe.
Following women's marches in Australia, a top police chief has suggested that a phone app could be used to register sexual consent, thinks that might be one of the helpful solutions.
Well, is it technology that we need to try to stop sexual assaults and rapes? Joining us to talk about this further is Professor Mick Fuller, a member of Denmark's Data Ethics Council, Charlene Douglas, who's a sex therapist, and dating author and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson. Good morning to all of you and thanks for joining us this morning. Charlene, let's start off with you, because what do you make of this idea? Is it something that we need to think about in order to make sure that this issue of consent is somehow sorted out?
Absolutely. I think it's a really good idea in a lot of ways. You know, I think it helps us have these types of conversations, which aren't normally conversations that we have. I think there are just some concerns, though, about the fact that, you know, sometimes, you know, a woman might decide that she wants to have sex at the beginning of the night and then she might change her mind sort of later on in the night, and it doesn't really capture that kind of information necessarily.
No, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Look, Professor Flitterbaum, it's good to have you with us this morning. You are obviously very much in support of technology. Technology has helped our lives in so many ways. Is this a use for it? Could it be put to some help?
So I really think it's a problematic kind of use of technology. As you say, we can use technology for so many things. But in this case, I think it's actually sort of trying to fix something really complex that's about human communication and so on through a click on an app. And I think that actually does more harm than good in this context, because it really reduces so many conversations, so many types of human interaction into something that's then fixed in a kind of contract in an app. And I think that is not the solution we need for this. I agree we need to have conversations about this, but not in this shape, I don't think.
Well, I mean, some would argue that the complexity of social interaction, of dating, of, you know, intimate relations is already being taken into technology, because so many use dating apps, and simply by swiping right and swiping left, you're already engaged in a process. And this, I mean, Mick Fuller, the police officer in Australia that has thought it up, has argued that it might give another layer of protection, another layer of consent, another layer of knowledge, if you like, about what the person who has swiped right is prepared to engage in. Could you see it as that?
As we just talked about, I think those things can change minute by minute in this type of really sort of intimate interaction that's about consent. So I have to admit, when I first saw the app, I thought it was a joke, because I really think it reduces something way too complex into a contract-like thing that you then put in an app. And just think about how difficult it could be to, you know, if you can't get to your phone, if something goes wrong, if you change your mind through the night, whatever. All of these things are not captured in this type of app.
Nikki, what do you make of it? Obviously, we're hearing that, you know, there are those people that have concerns about how it would work, but obviously we need to be having better conversations about consent when we look at the number of convictions, for example, for sexual assaults, for rapes. There's something going wrong here, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's going wrong is really our social conversation about what consent is. I mean, most people don't know that you can withdraw consent. I mean, you can be having sex with somebody and at some point decide you don't want to continue anymore and just say, that's enough, thanks, I've had enough. And that is not understood, generally speaking. So the other thing that really alarms me is, say a couple are in a dynamic where maybe there's some control element going on. You could have somebody persuading the other person to agree to a bunch of sex acts that they don't actually want to go along with. There's a lot of room for abuse. Now, I work as a dating consultant, and technology can do amazing things for human relationships, but what the money should be being spent on is education. You could use an app to teach people how to negotiate what they enjoy, their boundaries, their pleasure, and that will be to the good.
Professor Flitterbaum, you have experience of this in Denmark, haven't you? You have tried this out in some way, and there's been pushback. What have been the results there?
So a lot of those conversations have been with people who have worked in this area for a long time and know the kind of complexities of consent and rape and sexual abuse and so on. And they've all come out in, very critical, because it, as we talked about just before, these types of solutions do not capture also, I think, what's often at play in these types of situations where something go wrong. What people mostly talk about is that they feel it's difficult to get out of a situation. And I think if you've already consented in an app, you may feel that it's difficult to withdraw that consent. You've sort of signed up for an intercourse within 24 hours, which is what this Danish version of the app actually talks about. So I think it really sort of actually will do more harm than good, because if there's one thing that also marks these types of situations where people get raped and so on, it's this a matter of power and control, somebody controlling another person and so on. And this app could actually be used for that purpose, because once you've consented, it could be understood as a kind of, you can do whatever you want with that person for 24 hours.
Yeah,
and
so flaws in how it might work. I mean, Charlene, obviously we're looking at the things that could go wrong with it. One of the co-developers was sort of saying, yes, it may feel strange now and controversial, but they reckon that in a year's time, it's the kind of thing that people would get used to. Do you think there is any role for something like this, even if this sort of system might have its problems, that actually, what is going to be the answer if it's not an app? What more can be done?
Well, I think the thing is, when you think about sort of dating apps back in the day, a lot of people were quite sceptical about dating apps, weren't they? And so now it seems like, quite, an easy way to kind of meet somebody, and people are quite okay about it. I'm not so sure, though, whether a sex consent app will do the same thing necessarily. I think, I agree with Nikki. It is about communication. It is about having those conversations about consent. And I suppose if you think about it, it adds an element of mistrust to a sexual relationship as well. And that's not an ingredient that you need to have fun and to connect with one another.
Right, well, it doesn't sound like any of you are in support of the idea. Most people who've got in touch have also said that they don't think it's a good idea, although some say that anything that creates even a conversation would be helpful. So thank you for joining in the conversation this morning. It's been good to talk to all of you.